Today, we're going to learn about labor unions in the early days of Washington State. First, we're going to review some of the key ideas that we introduced in yesterday's lesson. Then we'll move on and expand upon that. Labor unions basically occur and are a group of workers that come together to try and get an employer to give them things that are more beneficial to them. And a lot of the times it actually pays off for the employer to give into these demands because then the workers are more happy and more productive. But in the early days, it wasn't always seen that way. In the early days, the companies and the people that had the property had all of the power. And so the people working for them didn't have as much power. And in the late 1880s, 1890s, as Washington became a state, there was a transition from people mainly working for themselves as farmers or people who built things into where they went to work for other people. And those people at times did not pay very well, and they did not give very good benefits, and they had some tough working situations. And for instance, in comparison to today a standard work week is 40 hours, 5 days, 8 hours a day. Around 1900, it was 72 hours. It was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So you got one day off, and you were pretty much so dead that day you couldn't do anything. Also, the pay was very low. The majority of jobs were held by men, but women and children worked too. And a lot of the time, those women and children worked just as long and just as hard as the men. And so what happened throughout the nation is that laborers came together, laborers being the people who did the work. They came together and formed labor unions, the organizations of workers whose goal was to improve working conditions. And their sole purpose was to try and get their employers to give them better benefits. They had strength in numbers because there was a whole group of them. And you would say, well, what could they do to make someone give them something? Well, they could refuse to work. And so what would happen is first a union would go to the employer and say, hey, we want more money, we want better working conditions, so on and so forth. The employer would go, I'm not giving you any of that. You have to have this job or you're not going to make it. So as a group, they would say, nope, we're done. We're not going to work. They would go on strike. A strike is when workers refuse to work until their company grants their demands. All right. Well, a lot of the time, the companies just fired the workers and replaced them with what is known as scabs, people who they would hire to come in and do the job that the others had been doing. A lot of the time, these scabs were immigrants or African Americans who migrated to the area from the South. Well, that created some resentment among the prior workers who had been striking. And so you can see the strikes and the unions, there was some resentments that were created, and there was some hostility. And hostility is a feeling of anger and resentment between two groups, and it would happen between the companies and the striking workers. Now, I don't want to get totally negative because a lot of the times the unions would get improved situations for their workers, and they would get higher pay. But sometimes that didn't happen. And sometimes, along with being fired by the company those people worked for, they would be blacklisted, which would mean an employer would take their names, put them on a list, pass it around to other employers, and say, hey, don't hire these people. They caused a lot of problems. They're part of that union. Don't hire them. And so they couldn't get hired. And so there was a lot of risk with being part of a union and being on strike. And so not everybody joined a union and not everybody went on strike. Some people just decided, hey, we're just going to go with the flow. It's hard work, but it's what we got to do to survive. Well, out of the conflicts, there became a bit of a fear of unions by people who were not involved with them. You got to think, if you're some farmer out here in Wenatchee, or if you're somebody working a job in Seattle and you don't have any problems, you look at these union people and you think, what are they doing? This is just a lot of nonsense. I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to hear about it. They're radical. They're extreme. They're causing problems. You know, they wouldn't really think about how hard some of these people worked or what they really needed. They would just consider the fact that the unions, they're hearing about unions, they're hearing about all this unrest and all these problems, and it's like, ooh, this is bad. Capitalism is a private ownership of land and property and business. It's basically what our country is founded on. And a lot of people saw unions as a threat to capitalism because they felt that, you know, these people who own the businesses, they worked hard to get the business. They should be able to do whatever they want with their workers. And so they felt that by unionizing and striking against some of these companies, it was creating a bit of a class war, the rich versus the poor. And it scared some people. Some people felt this was just very radical. Then along came the Industrial Workers of the World, which was one of the first well-known labor unions that came to the Pacific Northwest. The Industrial Workers of the World, or known by the acronym IWW, also the nickname the Wobblies. They were kind of one big union, and they wanted to change capitalism to favor the employees. All right. They didn't discriminate against immigrants, blacks, women, or anybody. They welcomed all workers, and they mainly wanted dignity, self-respect, or pride for their workers. And they wanted, workers to have better conditions and higher wages. They encouraged strikes, and they encouraged whatever it took to get things done. Well, in some situations, like the Everett Massacre, other people got involved with these strikes, and these people were known as vigilantes. They were people who decided they would jump in and punish people they thought were criminals. And so in this case, the vigilantes jumped in and thought they would punish the Wobblies, the union people, for causing the unrest. And so after a lot of the union people came to Everett, some of these vigilantes jumped in. They shot at them. There was a big fight. 5 of the mill workers who were unionized and even a couple of the vigilantes were killed. And that was the Everett Massacre. And nothing really got resolved. Nobody got convicted. And the strike pretty much continued. And nobody got anything better out of it. Things like this continued up through the Seattle General Strike, which occurred. We're going to move forward a little bit. It occurred after World War I. There were a lot of ships built in Seattle during World War I, and after the war, a lot of the workers thought they should have better benefits and better pay. So they unionized and went on strike against the shipbuilders. Well, the shipbuilders would not give in to their demands. And so all of the union jobs in Seattle decided to go on strike for all companies. So basically, most of the workers in Seattle were on strike. Although they got some of their demands, the government had to come in and they had to post soldiers to kind of break up some of the unrest and the fights and the problems that would happen because of the strikes. And it didn't look good. And so even though the unions got some better pay and some better treatment from the employers, overall, the general strike looked bad to the public who was not involved, and it caused people to be even scared a little bit more by the unions. So basically, people thought the unions were kind of radical still. This continued with the Centralia Massacre, where a bunch of people got involved, known as legionnaires. They were vigilantes who came in and thought the Wobblies, the union people, were bad and started another fight. And actually, 3 of those people were killed. Not a lot of resolve here. So bottom line, what we got going on is you got capitalists who own companies who want to make money, but they weren't paying the employees a lot. Employees get together, form unions, fight back to get better rights. A lot of conflict, a lot of strikes. Sometimes things get resolved. Sometimes they wouldn't at that time. Looked kind of bad for people, scared people about unions, especially those that were not involved in unions. But through time, the unions didn't give up. And through time, they were able to reform things, and they were actually able to get the government involved and to pass laws that shortened the workday, restricted how much children could be made to work, got better benefits, got better pay. And so the unions in the long run were able to get a lot done. But initially, a lot of conflict, kind of a scary situation for some people who were not involved. Probably worth it on the long run for a lot of those people in the unions, but they had to go through a lot to get what they wanted. So that's kind of the story about unions early on in the state. We'll pick this up and explore more in a couple lessons, all right? Now, there is a quiz you need to do. Go ahead and take the quiz, fill that out, and then if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.